Edwin Judge is a distinguished scholar of Roman history and regarded as one of the most important social historians of early Christianity. In fact, in a recent volume of his collected works, the editor described Professor Judge as a turning point in scholarship and the new founder of what has come to be called the social scientific criticism of the New Testament. We at CPX are honoured to capture some key thoughts of this truly outstanding scholar. Edwin, thanks for joining us. I want to talk about a figure that the Da Vinci Code has put on the agenda for many people, and that is Constantine the Great, the emperor. There's a lot of controversial talk about his influence on the church and the direction of Christianity. Can you just give us a summary first of Constantine's life and his conversion to Christianity?
Well, he was the son of one of the four rulers of the Roman world, and in rather contested circumstances, he had himself elevated to one of the supreme four, and in a series of civil wars and so on, he then turned out the victor. Now, the crucial thing was, we believe that his mother was a Christian believer, but the thing that is not in doubt is that he had a great vision. I mean, people do doubt it, but I believe the most skeptical historians actually easily recognize that people do have visions, and the vision, whether he was simply hallucinating and so on is another matter, but the vision was of the figure of a cross in the sky, and the message was that under this sign he would win his battle. And he did. He got the sign of the cross put on the shields of his soldiers, and they won. And so he was now convinced. Now, it's doubtful whether Constantine was in any ordinary church sense a believer. He was doing what every Roman commander would do, seek a divine backer and entrust his victory by honouring the particular god. Now, he got his divine backer out of a vision, but he took it extremely seriously, and he rapidly acquainted himself with the leaders of the churches who told him what the cross meant, and within a few months we know from surviving documents, which are quite numerous, from Constantine himself, and in my view written by Constantine, that he went through a crash course in biblical theology under the eyes of a bishop who advised him. And the reason why I'm certain these things are, and I'm not the only one who is certain, that these things are actually written by Constantine himself and not written by the bishop for him or anything like that, is he talks about his personal guilt and his dread of the judgment of God. He was terrified of the wrath of God. He realized that a judgment lay at the end of his life, at the bar of God, and he was literally transfixed by the psychological crisis that's created in his life. He felt guilty as a human being. In order to assuage his problem and continue with the favor of the Almighty as he now understood him, he needed the church bishops to agree, and they wouldn't agree. They kept quarreling with each other. He was horrified by this. He got really furious with them and started denouncing them and threatening them with punishments worse than death if they didn't agree with each other. And he failed totally. In spite of the fact that he got them all to agree, it was a compelled agreement. And so from then on, the Roman government was caught century after century with the problem of how to deal with the intellectual vitality of the Christian movement, full of disagreement, full of fascinating theological debate, when what the government wanted was simply agreement, because agreement would win the favour of heaven.
In your view, has Constantine's conversion been a good thing for the path of the Christian faith or detrimental to it?
On balance, a terribly bad thing, I think. And I say that because people sometimes think, indeed, my opposite number in Yale, well, in Cambridge actually, the late professor in Cambridge of ancient history, seems to me actually to believe that without Constantine there would have been no Christianization. This is totally wrong. We know this because in the papyrus documents from Egypt, which we study in my university, it is quite clear that the Christianization process was going on apace before Constantine's intervention in Egypt, which took place 1 year before the Nicene Council, 324. And until that time, Egypt was under the control of rulers who were anti or unsympathetic to the Christian tradition, and yet Christianization was rapidly progressing by leaps and bounds. In other words, it was happening in spite of the Roman government. So it is wrong to say that Constantine Christianized the world. What he did, take a world that was rapidly going over to Christian belief, accepted allegiance to the God of the Bible as his personal God, and then proceeded by law to try to privilege it, to protect the churches, to give them advantages, to try to stamp out heresy and all this kind of thing. And all the miserable centuries that have followed, where force was used in the name of the church, follow from the misjudgment that Constantine made, under advice, of course. That's the trouble. It's only in our own lifetimes that this nexus has been pretty finally broken, and that's a good thing.
In the Da Vinci Code, which is a novel, we're told that Constantine is responsible for the teaching that Christ is divine, and also for assembling what should be in the New Testament and enforcing that. How plausible are these two ideas?
Oh, they're quite unhistorical. I mean, Constantine had nothing to do with the divinity of Christ. He was very interested in the sovereignty of God and the judgment of God. That was what preoccupied him. He became wrapped up in the divinity of Christ issue because of the bishops' conference. It was their argument, not his argument. All he wanted was to get it settled. No, he didn't invent anything. He was simply looking for agreement amongst the bishops. So he was inventing nothing. He was not a theologian and didn't want to be. He wanted to be advised by bishops. He was not telling them what to do, in spite of the fact that as chairman of their meeting, he said, well, what about this word and what about that word and so on, but he wasn't doing the thinking.
What about the assembling of the New Testament?
The reason why people say that is that he did order a very large number of massive, heavy books containing all the Christian scriptures in one big bound volume of the sort that still sits on lecterns in churches to this day. Constantine invented that. He invented the big, fat, black book. But the contents of it were nothing to do with him. The contents of it were the accumulated writings of 3 centuries before that had been sifted, debated, gathered, and validated as authentic parts of the tradition by generation after generation of debate in the churches and usage and so on. The selecting of what we call the canonical books of Scripture was not done by Constantine.